hello everyone, it's 1 o'clock and it's time to start this free webinar on having difficult conversations, a step-by-step guide. And there are a few people on this call who I haven't met before, so I'll just say a little bit about myself. So I am an occupational psychologist and I work as a coach and trainer and workplace mediator in all different types of businesses and organisations, from manufacturing to sales to in education, etc. So all different types of organisations. And I specialise in two main areas. One is about having these difficult conversations. And sometimes it's working with teams who are in conflict or individuals in conflict, or training, coaching people to have those difficult conversations and make it a lot easier. And the other area linked to that is about resilience and how do people manage the pressures and stresses on them in order to be able to thrive. So just in case you have to dive away at the end of this, before the end of the session, and if you like this sort of thing, you might want to, if you don't already receive Melanie's Monday motivational messages, which are very kind of short pieces, then you might want to register with my website, inspiretransformation.co.uk, and also for my monthly coaching newsletter, and to hear about these free webinars. I'm also launching a 8-week online course, and there's two kind of payments or scales to it, and that starts on the 28th of October. So again, you can look at the website under free resources for more information about that. So this webinar, so I want this to be practical. So to thinking about what, you know, when you face difficult conversations, is what's your response, and also what is a difficult conversation to you. So what's difficult for one person is a walk in the park for somebody else, and it really does vary. But also, what's your response? And I tend to find that when I coach and train people, is that if they find it difficult to have difficult conversations, is they either, other sort of people get very fiery, or they're the people who just want to run away. And actually, I was one of those people who just wanted to run away from conflict. So actually, everything I coach and train people on are things that I've learned how to do myself. So I know the kind of tools and techniques work. So if you are either the lion or the sheep, getting fiery or wanting to run away, it's about actually how do you manage your emotional response. So I'm going to talk a bit about that, and also other kind of steps. So let's move on to it's the steps. So I'm going to talk about managing your brain's threat response. I am going to talk about building rapport with other people and the importance of having rapport when you are having those difficult conversations. Also about really, showing that you're listening and the importance of that, asking the questions and managing the interactions. Now, obviously, I'm doing all of that in about 25 minutes that I've got left. So let's crack on. And it is going to give you an overview, so you might well have questions. Feel free to ask them at different points. So one thing I was going to say is, although I've kind of said step-by-step guide, is that actually it's not one size that fits all. You've got to think about, well, what will suit your personality? What suits the person in front of you that you're having this difficult conversation with, and the environment you're in? Is it a pre-planned, or is it, oh, it's just happened? You're in the middle of a meeting and somebody starts to challenge you, and then and how do you apply these ideas? So the situation you're in. So it is about, each time you have to tailor your approach. And I'm just coaching a head of operations at the moment, and they just said to me that they're in a new role, and they said, I thought I knew how to have difficult conversations, but I'm learning that I need to keep on adapting my approach. Is that what worked in the past, but isn't necessarily working with the people I'm working with now. So it is adapting it. So the first thing is that if we consider something difficult, in all likelihood, we are having an emotional reaction. And actually, a reaction in our brain at the level of neuroscience. And it's quite interesting. I've been running lots of courses recently where sometimes people go, I don't have difficult conversations. And actually they're not having them because they're avoiding them. And they're avoiding them because of what, first of all, is going on in their brains. And so just to say a little bit about our brain. So our brain is designed to keep us safe. So it's constantly looking out for risks and threats. So if it thinks about, well, actually challenging a colleague who always talks over you or demeans you or whatever else in a meeting, if that considers it as a threat, then it's going to go into the threat response, and it's going to be hard then to be able to have that difficult conversation in a much easier and more constructive way. And there are various different things that happen when we go into threat response. So it's that fight, flight, or freeze. And it's one thing is our dopamine levels go down. And so we become more pessimistic. So if we're thinking about, well, I've got to have a difficult conversation coming up, or I'm going to that meeting, that person's always very difficult. If our threat response gets triggered, then we become more pessimistic. Also a whole range of other chemical reactions. We become very tunnel visioned. Which is when you're in a debate with somebody, that's not good. If you both go in tunnel vision and that threat response is, you're almost on a hiding to nothing because you're not listening to each other, etc. It's also cortisol, the stress hormone is released. That has an impact on our brain. It means that our brain isn't working as effectively. And I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because I have a webinar recording that I can send you about this that goes into a lot more detail. But if you are experiencing this threat response, so either when you think about going into a situation or you're in the situation, it's doing one or, just a couple of these to start to dampen down your threat response. Also, these sorts of things work in the moment. When I usually go around with a thermometer at the moment when I'm running my courses, and talk about our emotional temperature. And if our emotional temperature is already really high, if something happens, then in terms of a difficult conversation, we're going to go off the scale. But actually, if it's quite low, we might have a blip in terms of that threat response. But we can very easily use these techniques to come back down. And so, one of the things is focusing in the here and now. So not the stories, the awful stories in our head. So somebody's going off on one in a meeting, and if we're thinking, well, I knew they were going to do that, never going to change, well, we're not in the here and now. We're actually listening to the story in the head. We're certainly not listening to the person that we're meant to be listening to. So bringing ourselves back into the here and now, feel our bum on the seats, etc. Change your breathing. Also, sometimes change your posture, get into the sort of posture you are when you're feeling relaxed and you're feeling confident. Is to look up briefly. I'm not going to go into the details of why that is, but it's something we do quite naturally when we are feeling confident. And there is a whole kind of neurological reason why, which I don't have time to go into the detail of that at the moment, but also stepping back and kind of engaging our kind of wise adult self. And I'm going to talk more about the adult self later, and obviously removing from yourself from the situation if that's possible. But if we're stuck in a meeting, it's not normally possible to do that. So dampen down your brain's threat response before you need to go into a conversation. But what about the other person's threat response? Because they may well, however skillfully you might approach things, they may well have at least an initial threat response. So steps 2 to 5 are about actually how you dampen down other people's threat response. And they're not necessarily sequential. Is that, I've said there's 5 steps, but actually you're kind of doing them almost simultaneously. So the first thing is about building rapport, is about connecting in some sort of way. And I'd like to share with you a model about why rapport is important. And for me, it's a foundation of any working relationship. And so if you don't have rapport, you haven't connected in some way, even if you agree with somebody, it's likely to come as across as patronizing. Whereas if you have got rapport, it's seen as encouraging, and that they, you know, and they're likely to feel good about it. On the other side of the equation, if you don't have rapport and you disagree, then it's seen as criticizing them as a person. Or maybe you've got to give some feedback about something, or you know, it might be to a colleague about their behavior, or it might be to a team member. It's likely they're much more likely to have a stronger threat response. If you've got that rapport, they may have a bit of a threat response, we're only human, but they're more likely to, it's going to come down, they're more likely to start listening and see it as reasonable. So you might want to, so if anyone's got any questions about this, normally it is kind of fairly kind of self-evident, but if you have any questions, do write in the question box. And I'm just going to talk because I know it takes time for people to type in it. That in terms of building rapport, you might want to kind of think about, well, actually, are there some people that you need to build better rapport with, or you could build better rapport with? Is that, you know, that sometimes it is about, you know, talk about non-work stuff, or finding things in common, etc. But actually there are some individuals who we really have got no rapport with, and then it's about improving how you are communicating in your day-to-day interactions with them. And that kind of nicely kind of comes on to what we're going to talk about, listening. So nobody seems to have any questions. So let's move on to, oh yeah, I know what I was going to say about rapport. And no, I think I'll bring it into the listening bit, is that, yes, I'll talk about it when I come to listening, is that it's really showing that we're listening. Now, if we're in a kind of a debate with somebody, is that, and we're in the stories in our head, we are not really going to be present. So being able to also sometimes stop doing what we're doing and pay attention. If somebody's come to you instead of, you know, still half looking at your emails, is to really look at them, really pay attention, and to be looking at them. Is what you'll find is that when somebody's talking, is their eyes will often, they'll be going all over the place, but when they come back, is that you are not checking your phone or your mobile or whatever else, but you are still maintaining, you're still looking in their direction. All those kind of non-verbals to actually show that you are still engaged, and particularly if you're on the phone as well, because you might be doing this on the phone. The importance of summarizing and really showing that you've heard what they've said. And when I trained as a workplace mediator, back I think it was in 2014, and we had to do kind of real, they weren't quite real mediations. We were role playing, but they were the full scale, and people had scripts, and it was quite full on. And one of the trainers said, if you find that somebody is going over and over in something, one point over and over again, it's because they don't feel heard. And therefore summarizing it, being able to say, well, actually, I think what you're saying is there's 3 points here. Or am I right in thinking what you're kind of saying is blah, blah, blah. So you're showing that you're trying to understand them. It's also reflecting back that content, but also sometimes reflecting back the emotions. So it might be that they've actually talked about their emotions. If somebody says, I'm feeling really frustrated here, is that don't say, I understand you're angry. Use the same words of them. That's really quite important. Is that, but also is that they might not say that, but actually acknowledging, actually, I understand you're really anxious, or you're really frustrated or angry or whatever it is. Again, people can kind of go, okay, they understand. Yes, that I am feeling really emotional about it. So being able to reflect back. But the other thing I wanted to kind of say here, there's also in terms of the the rapport, is that also to manage silences. And just a little bit about different personality types. You get extrovert thinkers and you get introvert thinkers. Extrovert thinkers, if you ask them a question, they speak as they think. Introvert thinkers, if you ask them a question, there will be silence because they think before they speak. And there can be a real mismatch. Extrovert thinkers don't like silences. So if you're an extrovert and you're dealing with an introvert, there will be silence because they're thinking. You need them, allow them space to think. Is that also with introverts, if you're dealing with an extrovert, extroverts don't mind being interrupted. In fact, they'll interrupt others. So sometimes you have to kind of get in there. You can do it in a diplomatic way. So I'll often go, hang on a moment, do you mind if I just interrupt you a moment? I just want to go back to something you said back here. Or can I just kind of summarize so I have understood it? And so people, so there can be this real mismatch that can kind of get in the way of rapport building and actually showing that we're listening. So if you're more of an extrovert thinker, you may need to get comfortable with silence. And if you're an extrovert thinker, what we're going to come on to next is you may need to be more assertive in terms of sometimes you need to interrupt. Obviously, they've spoken for quite some time, or else they'll just go on and on and on. There will be no silence with an extrovert thinker. So let's go on to questioning. So we're showing the listening. And as I say, it's not a step-by-step because you may well ask a question first of all, and then do your listening, and you'll mix it together. I love this quote from Stephen Covey that says, seek first to understand and then be understood. And so much when we are going head to head with others is that we are just wanting them to understand us. And we're forgetting that actually we need to understand them first of all. So saying things like, actually, I'm interested to hear more about your views on this and it might be even saying, look, I know we've got different views on this, but tell me more about where you're coming from, because I want to understand, so that we can find a way forward. Ask some open questions. Tell me about, can you give me an example of whatever else it is talking about? And they're kind of probe for details. And if you then do your reflecting back or summarizing, etc., it's much more likely that they are going to then be happy to listen to you if you've done some really good questioning and listening and showing that you're seeking to understand them. And so I think it's so often, and this is where this managing that threat response, so being able to dampen that down even as you're having a conversation, just take a deep breath. Nobody can necessarily have to see it. Just kind of sitting back. For me, it's shoulders kind of more relaxed, etc., sitting tall rather than kind of getting hunched up and kind of get into a fearful mode, is that to be able to ask questions, to listen, to show that I'm listening. And it's amazing how the people start to come down in terms of their threat response and then their ability to start to listen. And I've had amazing examples of being able to turn around sometimes from really entrenched situations, and particularly some of my voluntary roles with some kind of really prickly characters who've been prickly with lots of people, not just me, and have been able to change this around, as I say, by managing my response, really good questions and really good listening. So any questions there before we move on? So feel free. Hopefully it's all kind of self-evident, but I'm reminding you of the things we kind of know, but we forget when we're in a difficult situation. So nobody's coming forth at the moment. I can't kind of see any questions. So let's move on to the fifth step. Oh, hang on a moment. Oh, someone's saying they love the Stephen Covey quote. Yes, I do as well. I think it's just so important. So let's go on to managing the interactions, and this is actually kind of crucial. And I'm going to introduce you to something called transactional analysis, or TA, that's been around since about the 1950s, but it's stood the test of time. And it's about using this model to understand the patterns of behavior you're falling into, and it gives you more options. So if I go, move forward, oops, I need to, let's go to the next slide, is there are 3 modes that we can come from. And so the parent mode, whether you are a parent or not, you have an internal parent inside you. And one part of that is hopefully a nurturing, caring parent. So if somebody's upset, even in the workplace, that we want to support them, but not do that too much because you end up rescuing them. And I am coaching a number of senior managers at the moment who are too busy rescuing their own managers and dealing with the issues that they've got, rather than empowering them and coaching them to solve their own problems. The critical controlling parent is the bit of us that gets irritated with other people. It's all my way's the only way, when actually there are different ways of doing things. It's your critical controlling parent when you kind of get cut up on the motorway. I would say outside of, and also outside of work, is if you have a dishwasher and you live with other people, it's the arguments about how to stack the dishwasher. That's controlling parent. It's not necessarily that there's just one way, or then some of you might be saying. Somebody's asked a question: would you recommend that if a heated meeting, to question and listen first? Okay, I'm just going to answer this. In a heated meeting, I would listen and then ask questions appropriately or reflect back. That shows that you're listening. But you need to be doing some listening in order to then be able to reflect back or summarize or ask the appropriate question. So it shows that you are listening. Okay, so just going on to more about the transactional analysis. I realise that the people ringing in are kind of thinking, where did that question come from? But it's from the chat box. So we talked about the parent mode. There's also the child mode. Even though we are adults, we don't always behave like adults. So there's the positive part of the child, which is a fun, carefree child. It's where our sense of humour comes from. It's our creativity. It gives us energy in the workplace. For me, it's a good sign in a team, whether a team is really healthy, is if they sorry, I've just got suddenly distracted by something that came up on the screen, is that if there is lots of healthy humour, and I talk about healthy humour because actually humour can also be done in a negative way. There's also the adaptive child, the bit of us that goes along with social norms, but you also have the fearful child. So that kind of, a lot of people who are fearful of having those difficult conversations, it's the fearful child. Fearful child will have lots of what ifs. It's worth writing down all your what ifs, and then bringing your kind of wise adult self to how to deal with this. Obviously, this is before you go into a difficult conversation. It's not in the middle of a meeting. You also have your sulky people sometimes sulk or they rebel, and you may well kind of see it. Doesn't matter how old you are in terms of a rebellious child. My 84-year-old mum has a very strong rebellious child. So both the parent and child are emotionally driven, where the adult requires us to manage our emotions so that we can be calm and rational. It's so we can really listen to other people and show that we're listening. Is that respecting other people's rights as well as my own. So I'm not going to walk over you, but I'm also not going to allow you to walk over me. And it's also about taking responsibility for actions, decisions and mistakes. And I've been using this model for about 30 years in organisations in the UK. I haven't come across one that when problems occur, people don't go into some sort of parent-child interaction. So let's look at the interactions, and I'm just going to quickly put this up because I'm keeping an eye on the time. Is that what you want is a mixture. Is that most of the time having adult to adult, then to have appropriate, fun child. And that just spontaneously happens, I tend to find, that when people are getting on and in good rapport, and do the nurturing parent as appropriate. And the challenge is not getting hooked by other people's behavior. So whether they're being really controlling down to you and expect you to kind of cower, or whether they are they're being in some childlike mode and I want you rescued, or they're used to somebody just going into critical controlling parent. So the way to change this is to manage your threat response, to be able to be calm and rational and respond, ask the questions, summarize, show that you're listening. All of those things help people to either come down or up into that adult to adult response. And so as I said, this is quite a kind of rush through. So if you've got any questions, just as I'm about to summarize, please feel free, if you've got any questions, write them in the question box. And also those people who are ringing in, as I said, feel free to email me any questions afterwards. But just to summarize, is the first step is to manage your brain's threat response. Either if you're in the moment in a difficult conversation, or you are planning to have one and you know it might be difficult, so that you're calm and rational. Look to build rapport, whether that's in the moment, or how do you need to build rapport beforehand, before having that difficult conversation. Really showing that you're listening. And not just playing lip service to it, but summarizing, showing that you've heard what they're saying. Then asking, what's the word? Asking relevant questions related to what they've been saying, and showing that you're seeking to understand them. And also aiming for that adult to adult interaction. Support, nurturing parent when you need to support and encourage people. People are really struggling, if they're really kind of losing hope about being able to change a situation, they need some nurturing parent. And also the fun child to lighten the load, and avoid that controlling critical parent and the negative aspects of the child as well. So nobody's kind of coming up with questions at the moment, which is probably quite a good sign. It means that it's they've understood it. But feel free if you do. What I always say to people on my courses is I always ask them, what are they going to keep doing that works? What are they going to develop further? So maybe it's your listening skills, or your questioning skills, or your patience, or actually your ability to manage and dampen down your threat response. And what are you going to let go of? Maybe that's control. Let go of control. Maybe it's about letting go of your ability to always be right, or your thinking that you should always be right, or your fears, or whatever it might be. So just as we kind of come near to the end, just to kind of remind, if you register with my website, inspiretransformation.co.uk, then you'll receive Melanie's Monday motivational messages, and also about my other free webinars. I've got another one coming up, I think it's the 9th of August, it's a Friday, and that's about how to create routines that sustain you. I'm also launching my second being and doing 8-week online course it's the 28th of October, which is about how do you manage yourself, and this is about actually how do you end the year on a high. And I also offer free audits for coaching audits for individuals, managers and businesses as well. So this has been recorded. Once it's edited, it will I will be posting it, so you can feel free to share it with colleagues, etc. And if you have any questions afterwards, please do come back to me. So nobody seems any questions, so I'm about to finish. So if anyone does have any final questions, then please feel free. If not, I try and keep to time. I make it, but it's now 1:30. So have a good rest of the day, and thank you so much for coming to this webinar, and hopefully that I will see you on another webinar, and then we'll have more in September and October as well. So goodbye for now.